John's heart hammered as the guard barred his way, refusing entry to Max, the service dog saving his life every day. Voices rose, the crowd tensed. Suddenly 2 soldiers appeared, their presence shifting everything in an instant. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. John's chest tightened as frustration twisted into a raw ache beneath his ribs. Every fiber of his being screamed against the guard's obstinance, a suffocating weight pressing down on his dignity. Years of training, sacrifices, and unspoken scars all seemed to dissolve into this moment of bitter exclusion. Max sat quietly beside him, eyes calm yet alert, sensing his handler's turmoil, but offering silent, steady companionship amid the rising storm. The crowd's murmur swelled, a mixture of disbelief, sympathy, and indignation, yet no one stepped forward. The cold rigidity of institutional protocol overshadowed the human need before them. Greg's stance was rigid, shoulders squared in what he believed was rightful authority. To him, the museum's pristine halls had to be preserved, protected from perceived threats, and rules were the only safeguard. He had no personal vendetta. Rather, he was trapped in the uncomfortable role of enforcer of policies written by distant administrators who never met John or Max. The guard's unease crept beneath his stern exterior, a subtle flicker of doubt as he confronted the fierce resolve radiating from a man whose service should have earned respect, not rejection. John's voice lowered, a growl beneath the fury. "You think this is just about rules? It's about my survival. Max is more than a dog. He's the difference between chaos and calm for me. You're denying that, and it cuts deeper than you know." The words spilled out, fueled by years of battles unseen by most. The crowd's empathy thickened. Some faces reddened with shame, others clenched in frustration at the injustice unfolding before them. Greg's hands tightened into fists at his sides, the rigidity of his posture betraying the tension inside. He wrestled with a gnawing sense of guilt, the harshness of his no exceptions rule clashing with a growing awareness that he was hurting a man who'd already paid too much. Yet the fear of breaking the rules, of losing control, of opening a floodgate he couldn't contain, anchored him firmly in place. His mind raced with scenarios, policy violations, complaints, disciplinary action, each a stone on the scale tipping against compassion. John glanced down at Max, whose calm presence was a stark contrast to the turmoil raging around them. He clenched his jaw, swallowing the lump of humiliation. This wasn't just about a museum visit. It was a stark reminder of battles fought on 2 fronts, against enemies abroad and against invisible barriers at home. The refusal wasn't merely procedural. It was a rejection of his lived reality, an erasure of his right to dignity and respect. Suddenly, a whispered conversation sparked among the onlookers, veterans recognizing the injustice, families nodding in silent solidarity. The atmosphere thickened with a collective unwillingness to let this stand. John's anger transformed slowly into a cold resolve, steeling himself to fight this blockade, not with rage alone, but with the weight of undeniable truth and quiet courage that had carried him through far worse. The moment stretched, taut and fragile, the museum's polished floors reflecting a battle far more complex than any exhibit behind the glass. John's pain was a piercing undercurrent beneath the heated words, a raw human vulnerability stripped bare. Greg, too, felt the invisible fracture widening between duty and humanity, the dissonance of a man caught between enforcing rules and honoring sacrifice. Neither could move yet, but the quiet before the storm promised change, an upheaval born not from chaos, but from the stubborn resilience of a veteran and his faithful companion, standing firm against injustice. The heavy, oppressive air that had settled over the museum lobby shifted abruptly when the rear doors swung open with a sharp clang. 2 figures in crisp Army Ranger uniforms strode in, their gait purposeful and confident, a silent declaration of authority and solidarity that sliced through the thick tension like a blade. The murmur of the crowd stilled replaced by a palpable wave of expectation. These were not strangers. They carried with them the unspoken weight of service and discipline, their very presence a counterbalance to the rigid refusal that had just unfolded. One of the rangers stepped forward, voice low but unwavering, directed at Greg with unmistakable clarity. "Sir, this man is a veteran, and that is a certified service dog. Blocking them from entry is unacceptable." His tone brooked no argument. It was a statement forged in the clarity of duty and respect, a reminder of the lines etched not just in policy manuals, but in honor and law. Greg's composure faltered, the stern mask slipping as he absorbed the reality before him. These men represented an institution he could neither ignore nor dismiss. The second ranger's voice was measured yet firm. "We're here to escort Mr. Miller and Max through the museum. We won't let him be denied." There was no room for negotiation or resistance. The calm determination in his eyes mirrored an unshakable belief in justice and brotherhood, a protective force surrounding John and his dog. In that moment, the abstract rights John had invoked became tangible and immediate, embodied by the unwavering stance of these soldiers. Greg's hesitation was brief, but telling. His eyes darted between the resolute faces of the rangers and the silent, expectant crowd. The invisible pressure mounted, a convergence of authority, empathy, and public scrutiny pressing down on him. Finally, with a reluctant step to the side, he ceded passage. The rangers flanked John and Max, forming a protective barrier that transformed the simple act of entering a museum into a potent symbol of recognition and respect. As they moved, the atmosphere shifted palpably. Guards stationed along the hallways straightened upon noticing the rangers, a swift nod or a brief salute signaling deference. Visitors previously engaged in their own quiet conversations turned toward the group, faces etched with subtle admiration and support. Whispers of approval threaded through the air like a rising tide, swelling against the earlier tension. Each footfall echoed with the weight of shared understanding, the invisible scars of service, and the silent battles fought long after the uniform is shed. Yet the fragile peace shattered suddenly at the next exhibit. A sharp clang, an unexpected noise that rippled through the space, triggered an instinctual response from Max. His ears twitched. A low, alert rumble slipped from his throat. The security alarm blared, slicing through the hushed reverence like a siren. Greg's face darkened immediately, frustration flaring in a storm of anger. "This is exactly why dogs aren't allowed," he snapped, his voice crackling with exasperation and fear of losing control. But the rangers remained unyielding, their calm counterpoint a shield against escalation. One spoke quietly but with undeniable authority, explaining Max's rigorous training and the essential role he played in John's well-being. They detailed the precise, controlled responses Max had been taught, the countless hours spent ensuring he would never be a threat, but a guardian against John's invisible wounds. Their words carried weight, not only because of their rank, but because they articulated a truth Greg had struggled to see amid his fears and policies. The museum director was summoned swiftly, a figure of authority whose presence added gravity to the unfolding scene. Behind closed doors, a tense discussion ensued, words exchanged, concerns aired, and policies scrutinized under the spotlight of this real-life encounter. The arguments for compassion, inclusion, and respect for veterans' rights found purchase. The rigid no animals policy began to bend, cracking under the combined force of reason, empathy, and the undeniable presence of duty. When the doors reopened, John felt a cautious but genuine easing of tension settle over him. The weight of rejection lightened, replaced by a fragile thread of hope. The crowd's subdued nods and the respectful distance given to Max reminded him he was no longer alone in this struggle. In that charged moment, amid polished exhibits and quiet halls, the battle had shifted, not just for John and Max, but for every veteran who might face similar walls of misunderstanding in the future. By the time the group reached the final gallery, the atmosphere had transformed almost imperceptibly, but with profound significance. The initial resistance, the hard lines drawn by policy and fear, gave way to something softer, more human, a recognition that extended beyond regulations into the realm of respect and understanding. The museum staff, once distant and defensive, now moved with a quiet attentiveness, their earlier rigidity replaced by a tentative openness. Eyes that had flashed with suspicion now held a trace of reverence as they observed John and Max navigating the polished floors with steady resolve. Greg approached John cautiously, his posture less confrontational, his voice subdued by the weight of realization. I didn't realize how important Max was, he confessed, the words almost a whisper, but heavy with sincerity. I'm sorry for the trouble. I was just following rules, but I see now that some rules need to be flexible. The admission was a small but vital crack in the fortress of institutional indifference, a gesture acknowledging the complexity that lay behind the letter of the law. John met Greg's gaze, the tension between them dissolving into mutual respect. He extended a hand, steady and firm, a bridge between misunderstanding and reconciliation. Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know. The handshake was not merely a formality. It was a tangible exchange of humanity, a moment that encapsulated the journey from conflict to common ground. Nearby, the two Army Rangers remained a quiet but potent presence, embodiments of discipline tempered with empathy. Their faces held the calm pride of men who understood sacrifice, not only in the theaters of war, but in the battles waged daily by those who bear unseen scars. Their intervention had been decisive, but their demeanor never boastful. Instead, they stood as reminders of the responsibility society holds toward or its veterans. Outside the museum, the story rippled outward with unexpected velocity. Social media platforms buzzed with posts, shares, and comments, igniting a national conversation on disability rights, service animals, and the often overlooked struggles of veterans reintegrating into civilian life. Hashtags circulated, blending personal testimonies with calls for systemic change, and the museum quickly found itself at the heart of a broader dialogue that transcended its walls. In response, the museum's leadership acted swiftly and decisively. Policies were rewritten to explicitly recognize service animals, emphasizing immediate acceptance and respect. Guards underwent comprehensive training, not only to identify legitimate service dogs, but to approach such situations with sensitivity and an understanding of the profound impact these animals have on their handlers' lives. Empathy was placed above bureaucracy, a subtle but critical shift that promised a more inclusive future. For John, the day's arc, from confrontation to reconciliation, marked more than personal vindication. It was a triumph that extended beyond the immediate, a beacon of hope for countless others who might one day face similar barriers. His experience became a narrative of courage meeting compassion, of justice restored not through grand gestures, but through steadfast advocacy and the willingness of individuals to listen and change. This story, seared into the memories of those who witnessed it, echoed a profound truth: that sometimes the fiercest battles are not fought with weapons, but with words, with understanding, and with the courage to stand firm in the face of ignorance. In those quiet, charged moments within the museum's hallowed halls, a legacy was forged, not just for John and Max, but for every veteran whose path would now be a little easier, every service dog whose place would now be recognized and honored. It was a victory defined not by conflict, but by connection, by the simple, powerful act of restoring justice and earning respect in a world too often blind to both.